During the late 20th and early 21st century CE, a seemingly simple item became the centerpiece of gatherings around the world, the charcuterie board. It was adorned with meats, fruits, nuts, and of course, cheese. It wasn't just food, it was a ritual in itself. But cheese's ritual life goes back much further in time. While we know ancient people did make cheese, we still have a lot of questions like, what is cheese fighting, and why did some people bury themselves with cheese? Hi, I'm Dr. Smiti Nathan, and I'm an archaeologist. In this video, we're going to explore the curious ritual life of cheese in the past. So let's get into it. Let's start with the Hittites. The Hittite culture spanned from around 1650 to 1200 BCE in the areas of modern-day Turkey. Our evidence for cheese's ritual life in this ancient Anatolian culture comes from tablets written in the Hittite language. Now, their language used cuneiform script. Cuneiform was an ancient writing system used to write several languages, including Akkadian and Sumerian. It possessed very recognizable wedge-shaped signs that could represent either symbols or logograms, which represent either a word or an idea. Hittite writings indicate that sacrifices or offerings of cheese were considered to be ritual tasks in religious rites. Cheese offerings were included in ritual rites to various deities. For example, when water springs dried up, a ritual was performed. Someone would go to a spring hole and offer cheese to appease the weather god and persuade him to return with the rain. There also seems to be a ritual game played at Hittite festivals, which can be translated to cheese fighting. According to scholar Michele Camerozano's analysis of Hittite texts that detailed the sport, there seem to have been 4 key steps in a typical cheese fight sequence. First, there was cheese squeezing/pressing. Camerozano thinks that this likely refers to a soft cheese that was pressed to remove fluid, resulting in a consistency that could be shaped into an object for the later fight. Second, there was a cheese presentation to the gods, which Camerozano assumes was for a blessing of some sort. Third, there was cheese distribution to the people. We're not entirely sure if this was a symbolic or literal distribution of cheese before the next step. Finally, the last step is for the young to fight with cheese. It seems cheese was used as part of the fight, but we're not entirely sure how. Some theories include throwing balls of cheese at one another or fashioning the cheese into some sort of other weapon. Personally, I can't help but imagine that it could have been something like a cross between a snowball fight, a stereotypical Western duel, and a wrestling match. Whatever way cheese fighting looked like, it seemed to have been an integral sporting event at Hittite festivals. And it also gives us more insight into Hittite rituals that included cheese. In addition to ritual festivals, Hittite texts might also give us some clues into cheese production at this time. The word for cheese in these Hittite texts was usually qualified with other terms, which indicated characteristics of the cheeses. This includes words for translating as large, crumbled, scoured or finished, and aged soldier. The terms scoured or aged might indicate the development or use of rennet in the cheese-making process at this point. Rennet is a set of enzymes produced in the stomach of certain mammals that people have used in cheese production. According to one translation, a term possibly meaning rennet appears in Hittite texts around 1400 BCE. This might be the earliest reference to the use of rennet to make cheese. But translation is a problem with Hittite texts because Hittite borrowed words from other languages. So while the presence of a word resembling rennet in this Hittite language is exciting, we can't be entirely sure if it meant the same thing in Akkadian and later languages. Still, these clues point to a deeper story of potentially how cheese was made at this time, as well as how it was woven into ritual life. And the Hittites weren't the only ancient society to offer cheese to their deities. If we go to ancient Greece, the Mycenaeans also included cheese in a list of offerings given to gods. Let's look at ancient Linear B texts, which was a syllabic script used for writing Mycenaean Greek. These texts indicate that foodstuffs, including cheese, were offered in palace sanctuaries to gods such as Poseidon, the god of the sea. So cheese in the Bronze Age Greek world played a dual role. It could be a basic food for rural people, as well as a prestige good for temples and the elite. We also find mentions of ancient Greek cheese in epic stories. Cheese is mentioned in Homer's 8th century BCE The Odyssey. On his journey home after the Trojan War, Odysseus encounters various mythological creatures, including the one-eyed giant Polyphemus, who happens to be one of Poseidon's children. Let's take a look at some excerpts from one translation. "We soon were at the cave, but did not find the Cyclops. He was pasturing his flocks. We went inside and looked at everything. We saw his crates weighed down with cheese and pens crammed full of lambs divided up by age, the newborns, middlings, and those just weaned. There were well-crafted bowls and pails for milking, all full of whey. My crew begged, 'Let us grab some cheese and quickly drive the kids and lambs out of their pens and down to our swift ships and sail away across the salty water.' Later, Polyphemus returns to the cave, and this is what we learn happens. He sat and all in order milked his ewes and she-goats. Then he set the lambs to suck beside each bleating mother. Then he curdled half of the fresh white milk, set that aside in wicker baskets, and the rest he stored in pails so he could drink it with his dinner." Personally, I love that these kind of details are mentioned in the Homeric texts. Now, if you're wondering what type of cheese the Odyssey is mentioning here, we're not entirely too sure. While we know that feta is the most popular cheese associated with this region in modern times, the ancient Greek word for cheese in this text is tyros, which could refer to a wide range of cheeses. Well, this story definitely demonstrates the desire for cheese by both humans and a Cyclops. It also gives us some hints into how cheese was preserved in a time before refrigeration. In fact, we have historical evidence from around the world that cheesemakers stored cheese in cool caves, so this practice could have been happening for millennia. In addition to Bronze Age Mycenaeans, later Bronze Age Greeks also included cheese in their offerings to their deities. Inscriptions found throughout Greece at various temples list cheese as one of the offerings made to deities. Excavations in the 1930s at the Acropolis in Athens unearthed marble inscriptions that were part of 2 altars built on the site around 500 BCE. These inscriptions provided detailed lists of sacrifices for various deities in the Eleusinian cult, including barley corn and meal, beans, sesame, oil, wine, cheese, and honey. In addition, the ancient Greek writer Xenophon tells us that cheese offerings were frequently pilfered from the Temple of Artemis by Spartan schoolboys as part of their training to become soldiers. In the ancient Greek world, cheese wasn't just a food. It could also serve as a ritual offering that bridged the everyday and the divine. Now, so far we've talked about textual sources that mention cheese. However, we do find actual material remains of cheese in the archaeological record, and it's often in an unlikely place. Now, when you think of cheese, you might not immediately think of death, unless you're lactose intolerant. But some of the most compelling cheese artifacts actually come from burials. Let's start with ancient Egypt. Now, when it comes to funerary rites and rituals, ancient Egyptians who could afford it would have been provided with various items as they transitioned into the afterlife. These items could include coffins, masks, furniture, jewelry, amulets, and food. Food was equally important to the Egyptians in the afterlife as it was on Earth. Food offerings were included in texts known as the offering lists. Offering lists, also known as the offering formula, were a magical text found on tomb walls and coffins that ensured a continual supply of offerings to the deceased. So if the mortuary called for a specific tomb stopped bringing offerings, the offering list magically provided an eternal supply of food. Such texts began with the phrase, "an offering that the king gives," and then listed all the offerings. These were usually food, such as the ubiquitous beer and bread offering, but also included other things such as fine linen. Food offerings were also physically deposited within tombs, and we have archaeological evidence for this. For example, Egyptologist Salima Ikram details a funerary meal that was found in a 2nd Dynasty princess's tomb at Saqqara. This tomb was discovered during excavations in the late 1930s. The meal was found laid out on the tomb floor next to the burial pit. The food was so well preserved in the tomb that its contents were, for the most part, all identifiable. Although many alabaster and diorite plates and bowls were discovered in the tomb, the funerary meal was served on ceramic dishes. The meal included quail, barley porridge, pigeon stew, grilled fish, a joint of beef and beef ribs, kidneys, bread, wine, fruit, and cheese. There was also cake for dessert. Now, the Saqqara cheese find is pretty amazing, but it's actually not even the oldest cheese artifact in ancient Egypt. The oldest find was actually found a few kilometers away from Saqqara. In 2010, excavations by Cairo University unearthed a previously discovered tomb which had been covered by sand at the end of the 19th century. This tomb belonged to the mayor of Memphis, Ptolemys, who lived approximately 3,200 years ago during the 19th dynasty. Ptolemys was a high-ranking official during the reigns of Seti I and Ramses II. In his tomb, excavators discovered a large broken pot containing a solidified whitish mass and canvas fabric, which might have been used to cover the jar. The whitish mass was likely cheese. Proteomic analysis revealed certain peptides and proteins, indicating the cheese would have been made by mixing cow and sheep/goat milk. This analysis further revealed that no peptides or proteins from lactobacillus, kefir, and phyceans, which is the usual signature characteristic for kefir or kefir-like fermentation, were found. We'll talk about kefir a bit more later, but what this means is that this cheese would have tasted quite acidic if you bit into it. Hopefully, Ptolemys would have enjoyed this punchy cheese snack in the afterlife. Overall, ancient Egypt's cheese artifacts show us that cheese held meaning beyond life and into the afterlife. Now let's go to the Taklamakan Desert in the Tarim Basin in present-day northwestern China. About 20 years ago, several small hunks of cheese were discovered scattered around the necks of individuals found in 3 tombs in the Shaohe Cemetery. These pieces of cheese are approximately 3,500 years old, making them the oldest remains of cheese discovered in the world so far. But there's even more to this find. Analysis of the ancient DNA from these hunks of cheese demonstrated that they were made from kefir. Now, kefir is a traditional beverage of sour, thin yogurt still drunk today throughout the region and in many other regions of the world. The cheese would have been made by straining kefir milk. The lumps of kefir could be used to ferment kefir milk into new kefir cheese, similar to how rennet ferments milk in many European cheese-making traditions. Mitochondrial DNA identified both bovine and caprine milk were used to produce this specific kefir cheese. However, unlike certain Greek and West Asian cheeses that use a combination of cow and sheep/goat milk, the cheeses found in the Tarim Basin were not mixed. It seems likely that certain animal milks were used for different batches of cheese. However, the scientists say that more data is needed to corroborate this. Still, these hunks of cheese help us understand the development and production of this particular type of cheese. Previous studies have shown that kefir cheese spread from the northern Caucasus to Europe and elsewhere, but this study shows a possible second route spread from Xinjiang to inland East Asia. So this study shows 2 strands of kefir cheeses and 2 different geographical origins for the cheese, one in Xinjiang and one in the Caucasus. These ancient cheese artifacts show that kefir cheese wasn't just part of the everyday diet in this region. Such cheese may have also held ritual or symbolic significance in the burial practices of these communities. Now, when it comes to cheese artifacts, finding actual bits of cheese like we did in ancient Egypt and the Tarim Basin isn't exactly common. When visible cheese remains are lacking, archaeologists can actually turn to another artifact to help us locate cheese. Let's go to Neolithic Central Europe. According to scholars, the development of dairying was a technological breakthrough during this time period. This was because nutritious food, including cheese, could be made from animal byproducts without killing the animal. In modern-day Poland, researcher Melanie Salk and her team decided to analyze ceramics used by Central European communities during the early Neolithic period in order to learn more about cheese during this time. Now, the production of cheese is technologically complex. Milk first needed to be coagulated either by using enzymes or acid. The liquid whey would then be strained, leaving the semi-solid curds behind. So ceramics can provide clues into different parts of the cheese-making process, from straining to storage. In fact, milk residues had already been found in pottery vessels in northwestern Anatolia dating to the 7th millennium BCE, but this could have been a range of dairy products. Going back to Central Europe, beginning in the 6th millennium BCE, potsherds with pierced holes began to appear in early Neolithic European sites. These vessels are part of a larger pottery assemblage known as linear pottery, or linear band ceramic. Previous scholars have interpreted these strainers as cheese strainers, but other scholars have proposed they were flame covers, honey strainers, or beer-making vessels. Salk and her team analyzed a selection of these potsherds from vessels pierced with small holes from sites in the region of Kujavia, Poland. While there were theories linking certain pottery types with milk processing, their study provided direct evidence of this. But as we mentioned before, just because you have milk doesn't automatically mean you have cheese. So how did Salk and her team know they might be seeing cheese? They used gas chromatography, mass spectrometry, and isotopic analysis on residue samples. They found a lot of milk fat, and when they compared the ancient milk fat amounts to the amounts you might see in modern cheese strainers, those amounts were comparable. So they think this is strong evidence that these vessels were used to separate curds from whey during the cheese-making process. This work demonstrates that even without visible cheese remains, the technological and cultural importance of early cheese-making can be uncovered through the traces it leaves behind. Now, vessels with holes like those found in Poland have also been found at 3rd millennium BCE Harappan sites in the ancient Indus. Some scholars have proposed the possibility that the Harappan civilization may have exported dried cheese to the Arabian Peninsula in ceramic pots. Other scholars have suggested that these perforated pots could have been used for the production of other dairy products like butter. It was only relatively recently that residue analysis was undertaken on a sample of such vessels through a study led by archaeologist Akshayeta Surya Narayan. The team found that over half of the ceramics contain lipid residues, indicating that animal fats of some sort were present. However, the analysis also revealed that other types of fats may have been present as well. The research team believes that the primary purpose of the vessels they sampled was likely not dairy processing, but rather that such pottery could have had multiple functions. As we mentioned before, just because you have evidence of milk doesn't automatically mean you have cheese. So when it comes to ancient South Asia, the archaeological evidence yielded from ceramics indicating possible cheese making is limited. However, cheese does show up in another source, the Vedas. These are sacred Hindu texts which were written after the collapse of the Harappan civilization beginning in 1500 BCE. These texts outline the process of curdling milk by adding sour milk, similar to using a starter culture to acid coagulate milk to make fresh cheese. The Vedas also mention other ways of curdling milk by adding various types of plants, such as the bark of the palash tree, the fruit of the kubala, and putika. If these plants contain such rennet-like enzymes, then the Vedas would be one of the earliest references to enzymatic cheeses. So what kind of cheeses were made? The Vedas mention 2 types of possible cheeses, one being called dadanma, and another which was a type of fresh cheese, possibly similar to paneer. These texts, as well as later Buddhist and Jainist texts, stress the importance of curds and fresh cheeses in this region. An aversion to aged cheeses might be related to the revered status of cows, which could have discouraged the development of animal rennet. Also, the lack of plant-based rennet might be due to food purity principles outlined in the Vedas, but this is still somewhat speculative. So while direct evidence remains limited, the archaeological and textual record possibly suggests that if cheesemaking was happening in this region, that it's centered on fresh curds, regional beliefs, and ritual practices. Now, the strainer ceramics in ancient Harappa and Neolithic Europe were not the only cheese-related artifacts out there. Let's go to Italy during the Bronze Age. Ceramic vessels, known as milk boilers, were used to make sure that milk didn't froth and boil over during the cheese-making process. These cheeses were produced using acid heat coagulation, and milk needed to be heated to high temperatures. There were 2 types of milk boilers used. One type, predominantly used in northern Italy, had an inverted funnel-shaped design. The other type, more common in southern Italy, had a candlestick-shaped design. So what type of cheeses did this process produce? Scholars believe that this process led to the development of ricotta-type cheeses in this region beginning in the Bronze Age. During the first millennium BCE, the use of these milk boilers declined sharply. And by the 7th century BCE, bronze and sometimes silver cheese graters began to appear in elite tombs from southern Campania to northern Etruria. These new tools found in elite tombs point to the emergence of hard grating cheeses. These Etruscan Bronze Age cheese graters would become an essential part of the Roman kitchen. In addition to changing tools, cheese-making practices also shifted during this time, going from acid heat coagulation to rennet coagulation. Artifacts like milk boilers and cheese graters reveal how cheese-making in this region evolved from fresh curds to aged cheeses, which reflects changes in technology and taste. Uncovering the traces of ancient cheese helps us better understand the role food played in ritual, identity, and daily life. Ancient texts, scientific analyses, and archaeological artifacts offer glimpses into how cheese was made, used, and valued across cultures. From ancient Anatolia to Bronze Age Italy, cheese was both present and meaningful. Now, if you're interested in learning about another ancient food that sometimes makes it on charcuterie boards, check out this video here. That's all for this video, and we'll catch you in the next one. Bye.